Welcome everybody. It's such a an oppor- just I'm just so honestly I've been dreaming about this conversation even before Dr. Davis, Sister Fania agreed to do this. In fact, um, I was having this conversation 5 years ago. So you're entering into a particular portal. And we call it a fellowship forum, but this unique conversation is special. Wanted to welcome Sister Fania and wanna read to you the just a little paragraph that we wrote up to try to capture the spirit of the conversation we want to have today. The title of our session today is Race, Restorative Justice, and Healing in a Time of Awakening, Repair, and Reimagining. For this fellowship forum, Dr. Fania Davis joins us to explore how we can reimagine healing and justice in the context of our racialized society. We will explore the intersections of racial justice, restorative justice, healing, and indigeneity at this inflection point. How are these times of disaster, awakening, and repair inviting us to release and imagine old structures, old social structures rooted in white supremacy? And how are these times ultimately inviting us to reimagine what it means to be human? What it means to be human. So with that, I wanna just gently welcome Sister Fania, and I'll host a little bit short of a practice a little later. But Sister, how are you doing? Welcome to the Garrison Institute, at least albeit virtually.
Oh, I'm well. I'm so good. I'm so excited too about this conversation. Um, and I'll talk about why I'm so excited in a moment. But first, I wondered if we could honor the land and do a land
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can start, and then I can
Mm-hmm.
honor the ancestors of the land here where I live
Yes.
in Oakland,
Yes.
California.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I wanna wanna acknowledge the Wappinger people, the Lene Lenape people, the land upon which the Garrison Institute stands, the land upon which I stand right now, and acknowledge the stewards of the land that upon which we all stand geographically, those of us who are in the US and those of us who are globally. Uh, just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you. And I live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone people here in Northern California. And it's wonderful to see that we are doing these acknowledgements to open public gatherings now, especially in the last year or so, all over the country.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's meaningful because the land is our mother. She sustains us, she nurtures us, she nourishes us. And so that's why Indigenous peoples began every public gathering with this kind of acknowledgement. And for us today in contemporary times, it's important, I think, because it acknowledges that the land where we stand, all of North America, every acre of it, is an occupied land, no less than the land of West Bank or the Ukraine. It acknowledges this is a post-genocidal land we live on, all of us Americans. No less than Rwanda or Germany are post-genocidal lands. Naming that is so important for us as we begin this, or as we continue on this journey of healing collective trauma, on this journey of reimagining structures and systems and institutions. And yeah, I also just want to acknowledge the brother Bob Moses, who just passed. A friend, and also the field secretary of the of SNCC. And he was one of the leaders of all of the work that was being done in Mississippi around voter registration, the Freedom Riders.
Mm.
And what I really loved too about this brother was that he understood that we need horizontal models, even as early as the 60s. We need horizontal models of leadership, not ego-based, vertical, sort of charismatic, single leader models. So I wanted to call his name and honor him as an ancestor.
Anything else on your ancestors before we begin?
I just want to honor all of our ancestors. We've been talking about yours a little bit, in the 10 minutes before we opened up. And I want to invite all of the ancestors of all of us present who bless this gathering and who empower this gathering. I just want them to be welcomed here today. And I also want to just tell you a little bit more about why I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. I can be very excitable. There's a part of me that can be very calm, but there's a part of me that can get really excited, and sometimes almost too excited because it can bleed over into hyperarousal, And I think for us as traumatized people, and it's hard for me even now to say that I am a traumatized person. There's some part of me that doesn't want to name that, but I am. And we can talk more about why I say that a little bit later, I suppose, when we talk about where I come from. But I'm just excited to be in the presence of this vortex of intelligence and commitment and dedication and energy that you bring to the intersections of social justice, of education, of restorative justice, of healing, of trauma science, and other fields that I haven't named. It's just so wonderful to see you as, the next generation, next generation, holding this and creating these beautiful spaces. So I got to say that. And relational mindfulness, I learned about that actually from watching you and Thomas in the video. I think I've seen 2 videos of your conversation. I've long practiced meditation, but I go in and out of it. And I haven't been consistent. And in part, I think that's because I have practiced it as a solitary activity. And so the whole notion of relational mindfulness is also very exciting to me. And about the conversations with Thomas, boy, it's so wonderful to see you two and to bear witness to these resonant fields, these conversations that model relational mindfulness, that model interidentity and interbeing and bringing to life in the flesh and in the blood what oneness means, what Ubuntu means, what Mitakyo Yasin and the Kotasu, all my relations, bringing to light these notions of transpersonal oneness. To see it, on the screen, to see it in life is just so exciting for me. And the third source of my excitement is that, restorative justice circles also generate this sense of oneness. The circle is unbroken. We are one. The inherent structure of reality is interrelatedness. And we experience that in well-facilitated restorative justice circles very often. And we can feel very close. Teachers say sometimes when we do trainings for over a period of a day, I've worked with so-and-so for 10 years and I've
Mhm.
learn more about them, and I feel closer to them just in the last 3 hours of our time together in this circle. So we reach a beautiful level of resonance and community and communalness in circles, but to contemplate the idea of infusing these collective trauma, these collective recovery
Mhm.
modalities into our circles is just, it's just really, really exciting to me.
Mhm.
Yeah. And related to that, I've been thinking a lot about how we need to, and how it's time to create laboratories within our movement that
Mhm.
augur the new future, that call forth the new future, that embody the values
Mhm.
of the new future. And so when I see you in conversation with Thomas and embodying that oneness, that sense of interidentity, and when I contemplate the thought of all of us in circles and doing that, um, it's just like creating these maroon spaces,
Mhm.
liberated zones,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
um, where we embody radical respect and radical listening and radical relationality.
Mhm.
Those are the spaces of the future, the spaces, the maroon spaces and the
Mhm.
liberated spaces. So that's why I'm so excited. I just had to say all of it.
Oh, thank you so much for that acknowledgement. You ended with maroon spaces, and indeed, folks, maroon spaces are fugitive spaces, and fugitive spaces are fugitive spaces of learning. So, in the spirit of that, let's create, on the one hand, a digital circle here today. So we're all in circle, indeed, uh, and let's create a maroon digital fugitive space today. Uh, and in light of that, I wanna invite us to a practice. I want to invite us into a short, just 3 minute grounding practice, just to kind of activate our presence and bring us. I'll set a little timer here for us. If you wish to take, actually, before I invite you to take your video off, in case those of you who want to participate with your video off, I want to begin this contemplative practice by actually inviting you to look at the screen and look at the people in these beautiful digital boxes. Go ahead and just just scan the gallery, each gallery. See if you can just take a moment to appreciate who's here. Even those whose videos are off, we send them so much love too. You can kind of resonate with looking at their name. Mm. I'll invite you to go a little deeper now and continue to resonate visually with the images of our colleagues here. And if you come to someone, you stop somewhere, maybe one person, and maybe a cluster of people, just sit for a moment, acknowledging those people, sending metta, sending positive energy their way. We're just kind of activating the social digital relations that are being forged here. And although we are on some levels separate in terms of geography and through the internet and through code, through this technological infrastructure, we are connected. In fact, this little thing here is nature extending itself, extending us. So nature Pachamama is right here. She is constellating this. Every bit, every binary code, every 0, 1, 0. Just acknowledging that. And then just gently, if you wish to turn your video off for this short practice, you can go ahead and do that. I'm gonna keep mine on. Just if as an option, if it's comfortable for you to gently close your eyes. If you want to keep your eyes open, feel free to just hold a soft gaze. Everything in practice is an option. It's a choice. So just inviting you to very simply settle into your chair. Settle into your chair, gently closing your eyes, and giving yourself this opportunity to just be with the energy and the sentiments that are coming up in this moment after that acknowledgement of the lands upon which we stand, that acknowledgement from Sister Fania, the intention of the conversation we're trying to have here. Finding your own rhythm with your breath. See if you can give yourself even more space each inhale. Giving yourself more and more space. More space to land in this present moment. More space to let go of what's not serving you in this present moment. More space to allow what needs to emerge in this present moment. Taking just a few more gentle, deep breaths as we bring our practice to a close. Taking some deep, gentle, clearing breaths. One more deep, gentle breath together. And as you exhale, see if you can slowly open your eyes. If you had them closed, uh, slowly kind of swaying back into the space, becoming more and more aware of the fertile ground that we are laying here. Just so excited for this conversation. So let's jump right in. In full transparency, we wanted to honor rest and restoration. So we're gonna have an intense, gentle, well-paced conversation, but we will end at the 4:15 mark. We will end our gathering at the 4:15 mark, just to give us a little bit of space and give each other some more time back. But we promise that the conversation will still be as rich. as if we were to extend it to 2 hours. Sister Fania, I want to begin this conversation. One of the things that brought me to your work when I was studying, just in general, I had a question of what are the inner connections between, or lack thereof, between social justice education and mindfulness. That was literally my question going into my doctorate, and came across so much in the field. Came across the rich work of actual activists on the ground, people like you and others who were attempting to dismantle systems that were causing structural harm, and people who were in the process of trying to make intense change. And then I also saw in the mindfulness space folks who were drawing on ancient and spiritual traditions, in many cases secularizing them and benefiting from them in terms of creating an incredible level of calm, stress reduction,
Yes.
and overall well-being. But there was a disconnect because there wasn't a lot of communication between the folks who were on this end trying to reduce stress and those folks here who were actually trying to create the conditions that produced the stress in the first place.
Yes.
And last thing I'll say is that I found your story when I came across your story of, being in the legal field and being a lawyer, bona fide lawyer, and burning out, and then having a spiritual experience, going off to the motherland and studying with elders there, and then getting a PhD in consciousness and indigeneity. I mean, so I was just like, I just found your story personally of that shift from integration of activists and practitioner and healing to be really powerful. And I just wanted to start there, around your journey there, and also where your lineage comes from in terms of your experience living in Alabama.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll start with the first question. I am from Birmingham, Alabama. I was born there during the nadir of apartheid, racial segregation, and also during the height of the civil rights movement that arose to challenge it. And my childhood was a childhood of a lot of love. We were living in racially segregated neighborhoods, of course. And there were bombs that went off at night just outside our doors, never touching us, praises be. So, it was a childhood that was filled with hatred, with racial terror. Our neighborhood was constantly being targeted by the Ku Klux Klan because we were Black people pushing the color line. We had moved into a previously all-white neighborhood, and our family was the first actually to move into that area. So the memories of these noises at night, I was only 2. My sister remembers more. She's 4 years older. But sounds of my father grabbing his gun to go downstairs because he heard noises, to join the other fathers in the neighborhood who'd created an armed patrol to protect their families. And then the bombing of our church, because we held interracial discussion groups there. And then across the street from the church, the bombing of the home of Arthur Shores, an unsung hero, an attorney who inspired me in many ways to become a lawyer, whose home was bombed 4 times. And thank God no one was ever hurt seriously. No one was killed. And then, the bombing that also very personally affected me was the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church, the Sunday school bombing, September 15th, 1963. 2 of the 4 girls who were killed were close friends of mine. One lived just 2 doors down from me.
Mm.
The other one was a very close friend of our families. We went on vacations together. That was the beauty of being in Alabama, against all of that stark terror. We had very close community relations, family relations, church. Um, but yeah, so that's my origin story, and then that explains a lot about who I am and why I do what I do today. The murder of my childhood friends and the bombing at the church generally, probably more than any single factor, put me on this path of being a warrior for justice.
Mm.
And then, the terror continued. I talked earlier about being a traumatized person. I don't see myself that way. But when you look at my history, I am. I mean, I'm very blessed and very fortunate that I've had resources, to support me, to help build resilience. But just a few years after the bombing, after I graduated college, my husband and I moved to California and began working with the Panthers. This was in the late 60s. And not long after that, police broke into our apartment and shot and almost killed my husband. And the bullet entered his shoulder and exited from just a millimeter away from his spine. He's very fortunate he was not permanently injured. Fortunate that he survived that. We were charged with attempted murder of police officers, but a very courageous judge dropped the charges against us. In fact, repeatedly dropped the charges of attempted murder of police officers against us because the district attorney kept re-indicting us. I think finally, after the third re-indictment was dismissed by the judge, the district attorney let it alone, and we were free. But that judge, his career was ruined from there. He wasn't able to advance anymore in the echelons of the judiciary. And then just months after that, Angela Davis, my sister, was targeted by then President Richard Nixon and then Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, and was charged with murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, all of which are capital offenses. So essentially she was facing the gas chamber because of her activism. I forgot to say that the charges were dropped by the judge because he found that the police should not have invaded our home in the first place. And the only reason they did so was because of our activism. We were being targeted because of our activism, especially with the Black Panthers. And Angela, too, was being targeted because of her activism, especially around George Jackson and the early prison movement or anti-prison movement, early abolition movement. So she served some time in prison. Many of you probably know her story, but experiencing that and traveling all over the world to save my sister's life, organizing in this country and abroad. Those are, when you think about that journey, that's a pretty traumatized life and journey and experience in my early years, especially. Yeah. So after all of these experiences, it created a lot of anger in me. And at one point I was a gun-toting revolutionary, doing target practice and planning to go to Tanzania where I could do training in urban guerrilla warfare. So there was a lot of rage in me. And after my sister was freed, the lawyers in that case inspired me to become a civil rights trial attorney. So I did that. I did a lot of litigation on civil rights cases, employment discrimination especially. And so after 40, 30 years or so of being an angry activist involved in all of the movements of my time, the prisoners' rights movement, the socialist movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movement, the Black Power movement, the anti-imperialist movement, the anti-apartheid movement, I was, you name it, I was involved in all of the movements of my time. And then did 20 years of practice as a civil rights trial lawyer. And then by the mid 1990s, I literally got sick. And I knew it was the ancestors' way or spirit's way of calling me to come back into balance, of calling me to bring more healing energies into my life, bring more healing waters in my life to balance the fire. And serendipitously, I found about this PhD program called Recovery of Indigenous Mind, and that sent me off to Africa to learn and apprentice with healers there and in other parts of the world. I had dreams during this time of transformation, this time when I knew that if I were going to stay on this planet, I needed to transform my life and bring more light to it, more love to it. And so, well, I spent all that time in Africa. I got the PhD in indigenous knowledge and came back to this country and ended up finding out about restorative justice, which was an epiphany for me, because restorative justice is a justice that heals, a justice that seeks to create peace instead of create more conflict. I knew firsthand from my law practice, my trial practice, that even when we won $1 million verdicts for our clients, the clients were in worse shape in terms of their spirit, in terms of their psyche, after the trial, after justice, than they were before the trial. Relationships were more damaged as a result of our adversarial, oppositional justice. So this justice that heals, this justice that seeks to repair relationships instead of damaging them further, I was very excited about that, and it was epiphanic for me. I was finally able to kind of release the hyper masculinist, the hyper rational, the hyper aggressive energies that I was forced to cultivate to be successful, or so I thought, as a trial lawyer and as an activist.
Yeah. Thank you. So, I've been sitting with your work for so long that I've heard you say it, and I've heard you say all that to me, and just in your talks, and maybe because I just had a son, I don't know, but when you were talking about you and Angela as babies, as children, experiencing and hearing the bombings, and I just was almost brought to tears, and I wanted to bring myself back into that moment, just to say that I'm sorry you had to go through that, and kind of enable all of us here to hold that and to resonate with you there, and resonate with the many other junctures in your life where you were met with structural violence, and I think that part of collective healing is just seeing you, not just for this icon, but this person who's gone through this transpersonal experience, and where we can meet you there and see you, So just wanted to say that.
That's beautiful. I've spoken in many places and before many, many people, that's the first time.
Mm,
This is the first time
mm,
that has been offered, that has been extended.
mm,
To what you said, holding me
mm,
um, and saying sorry for that. It's
mm.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you all. Thank you all. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
indeed.
Mhm.
Yeah, in the spirit of Ubuntu, and I think what the reason why I was pushed to do that in that moment was partly of just the natural emotion that was stirring up. But if you listen to you, I listened to you, it's like you were holding us. All those movements you were part of, and not just you, but Angela, your whole lineage, you were holding the collective as well. So it's just reciprocity, um, in the simplest form. Um, I think if it helps, I think it would be useful to get into some a conversation around. I saw you once talk about not necessarily the differences between like restorative justice and transformational justice and healing justice. Sometimes those conversations aren't necessarily necessary, but
Mhm.
I do think it's important for us to talk about why,
Mhm.
uh, under these historical conditions, these kinds of justice emerge in relation to race, white supremacy, classism, and the social political structure we have as we call capitalism. So I just thought that it would be useful to have you maybe reflect a little bit around some of those concepts.
Mhm. Sure, sure. Um, well, I have this lived experience of the harm, this powerful lived experience of the harm that our justice system engenders and inflicts and creates. Ours is a system, the prevailing system of justice, based on Roman notions of just deserts, um, that says that if I cause a harm, that creates an imbalance in the scales of justice. The only way to rebalance is to cause an additional harm to the person,
Mm,
responsible person. So we respond to the original harm in our justice system with a second harm, right? It's sort of a vengeance-based harm, a retaliation or justice, a vengeance-based justice,
mhm,
a retaliation-based justice, a justice that harms people who harm people, presumably to show that harming people is wrong.
mm,
And all we do is reproduce harm, replicate harm,
mm,
add to the harm, add to the collective energies of harm in the world. It's a massive machine of harm. And, um, and then when you look at our nation, we as a nation were born in trauma,
mhm,
born in the harm of genocide, of land theft, of slavery, the slave trade, heteropatriarchy, human supremacy. Um, and we were born in these harms, and these harms and these traumas continue to reenact themselves. We have the afterlives of slavery. We have the presence of the past. We have the legacies, and we see that all around us today, of course. So we are a towering, our culture, our nation, our legal system, um, our economic system, racial capitalism, our origins, that's all a towering, a massive monument to harm.
Mm.
Oh, that's who we are
Mm.
as a nation. And of course, we have been in collective denial about that. We prefer to believe we are a nation born in liberty and dedicated to the proposition all are created equal. We prefer to believe that we are the White House, the shining White House on the hill that's a beacon of democracy for the world. And our popular culture, our textbooks, our curricula are all sanitized to teach that to all of us. And we grew up believing that.
Mm-hmm.
And burying these explosive, massive truths about who we truly are. And when I talk about awakening,
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of these times is that for the first time, we are beginning, especially white people,
Mm-hmm.
who have known this about who we are, we are beginning to awaken to the truth of who we are as a nation. And I say that because I noticed during in the wake of the George Floyd public lynching, really,
Mm-hmm.
the demonstrations were majority white. Until that time, all of the anti-police terror demonstrations were majority Black around Trayvon Martin, around around Ferguson, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and on and on and on. All of those demonstrations prior to George Floyd were majority Black, but for the first time, white people came out, even in small rural areas that had never had demonstrations before. And even though up until that time, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, white people were talking about, well, white lives matter. But after George Floyd, 60% polls showed that 60% of white people supported Black Lives Matter. And just so much has happened since then, and even before then, we started to see the monuments to the Civil War and to the Confederacy and to slavery coming down, and multiples, hundreds, well, more, I think about 125 monuments have come down in cities all over the country. We see universities that are telling the truth finally, unearthing long buried truths about their complicity with slavery and the slave trade, whether we're talking about Harvard or Yale or Brown or University of Virginia. There's an organization called Universities Studying Slavery. It's a network of almost 80 universities that are unearthing these long buried truths. There are reparations funds. Georgetown, for example, told the truth about their complicity with slavery even before the George Floyd killing, and told the world that they sold more than 200 enslaved persons to keep that university afloat. And so those 200 odd people of color, Black people, their bodies were sold, and the university owes their existence to them. And so now they're contacting descendants of these enslaved persons who were sold and sitting down to talk about reparations. And Georgetown has created a $100 million reparations fund. And this is happening not only at Georgetown, but at other universities. Apple has a $100 million reparations fund. There are reparations initiatives all over the country in more than 200 municipalities. But that's just a glimpse at what I see as an amazing awakening that's going on. And there's lots more evidence of that. But it's an exciting time.
Yeah.
Reason. Mhm.
Yeah. So I just want to slow us down as a collective, just to sense into everything that Fania just shared around the kind of explosive response to the public murder and lynching of George Floyd, and the byproduct of that in terms of global outcry and support, what many may call a racial reckoning, and how that may have supported the acceleration of support for reimagining
Yes.
things like reparations and
Yes.
other restorative processes. Just want to just hold that, and the promise of that, and I want to hold that together with us, because it does also feel in this moment that there is a closing, a collapsing, an absencing in some regards, like just thinking about some of the legislation trying to
Yes.
ban critical race theory, and thinking about the ways in which in the university system, people like Hannah Nicole Jones at Cornell West still have to fight to be acknowledged in terms of tenure.
Right.
Thinking about how even some of the white folks who did come out and support the Black Lives Matter movement are now kind of receding. And then also just like what many, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, the last 4 years have been difficult in terms of the level of vitriol and tension that came out of federal offices, federal office. So just sitting with like the
Yes.
tension and the dialectic, I know some of your consciousness studies, and thinking about dialectics, like holding the promise of the awakening, and then the reality, another reality of just how some folks, and some slices of our society are becoming even more entrenched, fragmented, calcified,
Yes. So true. And it's part of this trauma pattern, Um, we make breakthroughs toward greater freedoms, and then there's a backlash. We can look at the Special Order 15 after the Civil War. General Sherman ordered that 40 acres and a mule be given to the newly freed enslaved persons. And in fact, some land was distributed, tens of thousands of acres were distributed. However, President Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson came in, a supporter of slaveholders, of the planters, and he took all that land back. Not only did he take it back, but he gave it to the white former slaveholders, the white planters. And that's why we say that the only reparations around slavery that Black people have gotten, or that have been given, the only reparations that have been given around slavery in this country was the reparations to white slaveholders back in the 1860s. And after more contemporary times, after President Obama, the first Black president, was elected, the backlash was in the person of the prior president. And today, after all these amazing gains have occurred and are still occurring, we're seeing, January 6th, armed insurrection by, white hate groups. And we're seeing these attacks on voting rights, and we're seeing these attacks on critical race theory. And I think, Angel, that this pattern that this sort of closed loop that we're caught up in, is an expression of trauma, of the collective trauma of the nation. And that's why I believe this healing work around trauma, I think that we can begin to interrupt these patterns finally. If we as a nation, explicitly engage in acts of healing and trauma recovery, that becomes, I'm not saying that every person in this country is going to come around if they sit in a collective recovery, trauma recovery circle, but I think that we have a greater chance of interrupting this pattern of making advances and then backlashes and sliding back. If we process finally as a nation, the trauma that we were born into. Mm-hmm. It's just, that's why your work and the healing work is just so important at this moment historically. I mean, we can make gains, we can make political gains, we can make economic gains, we can make gains in education and in health. But if they remain sort of on the political level, if we don't really go deep as a nation and have these healing processes happening all over the country and in schools, especially, you know, with our young people, but in churches and communities and in all collective spaces, I think we'll continue to repeat these patterns ad infinitum.
Yeah. I think I'd love to spend the rest of our time together before we allow and invite the audience to contribute. You know, you've spent so much time studying indigeneity, studying different approaches to healing modalities, and just wanted to invite you to kind of maybe reflect with us around, like, what does it take to interrupt and to reimagine, you know, how we show up in this current moment where I think we're all called to do some kind of healing work, whether we're calling it that or not. So just wanted to invite you to reflect on that as we pivot towards maybe hearing some audience voices.
What does it take? It takes, first of all, the understanding that we won't have a future unless we become skilled in doing this healing work. We are experts at causing harm. You know, we were born into that. That is our lineage as a nation. Harming our bodies, our minds, our spirits, our children, our earth, our communities, our families. We are very good at that. So I think first is the recognition that if we are to have a future, we must build our capacity to engage with one another, with the earth, in ways that bring healing and wholeness and holiness, instead of ways that bring domination, discord, devastation. And I love Indigenous worldviews and knowledges because they understand that so well. It's a pre-colonial, pre-racial capitalist, pre-land theft, pre-genocidal way of being present in the world. And not saying that we therefore mimic, you know, Indigenous cultures, but there are so many wonderful insights that could be great medicine for us in these times. So, you know, that's, and, you know, the need for healing stands side by side with the need for justice. In some ways, I think we need to become both healers and warriors, or not warriors in the militaristic, you know, sense and the aggressive bellicose sense, but warriors in the warrior sage sense. We need to be strong to address these massive systems of harm, you know, and to stand up to them. So it's important for us to have both that intention and preparation and capacity to address unjust systems, inequitable systems on political levels, and and as well as address them in healing ways. And so these circles that we talk about, and these trauma spaces, these maroon spaces, these liberated zones, I see them as spaces where we can embody not only the values of creating fields that of inter-identity, of inter-being, of love, of deep connection, also as spaces that are grounded in radical respect, radical relationality, a radical responsibility, and that are grounded in values of anti-racial capitalism, anti-heteropatriarchy, or sexism, and so on and so forth. So these spaces are both healing spaces and justice spaces, as I envision them.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And
I was having those thoughts about, and actually taking steps to go there, around the time that my husband and I were facing charges of attempted murder of police officers. So I kind of got distracted, or I had to put my energies there. And then after we were cleared by the courts, my sister's case came, and that I had a baby, and that changed my direction. When Angela was charged, that was in August of 1970, and she was acquitted by an all-white jury in June of 1972. And so all of that time my life was nothing but, freeing my sister 24/7. And then after we freed her, I became involved in movements, anti-prison movements. And then I became a lawyer, and life happened, essentially. So I can't say that there was any particular moment that caused me to change directions and not pursue earlier plans to go to Tanzania. It was just the waves of life took me in another direction. And then Jerome, I appreciate your empathy. I appreciate your deeply felt care. And again, I appreciate that from all of you. It's a unique experience for me, and I repeat, and I'm so grateful for it. And Jerome, you talked about being willing to cooperate in anti-racist struggles and initiatives. And one of the things that I wanted to say to you is that history is calling upon white people like never before to step up to the plate, not as solely allies of Black people, but as persons who are reclaiming their own humanity. White people have skin in the game. It's not about simply helping, oppressed people. It's about helping yourself and humanizing yourself, and in many ways engaging in some sort of identity transformation process to transform whiteness. And that means being very committed to showing up in the world as white anti-racist leaders, modeling what it means to be a white anti-racist leader, not expecting people of color to do all that work for white people, because people of color have been doing that work for centuries, and that's an expression of the dysfunction in the first place. And the good thing, as I suggested earlier, is that white people are stepping up to the plate in ways that I have never seen before in my long years of activism. And that's very encouraging to me. I mean, organizations like Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURGE, has just had an explosion in its membership, a mushrooming of tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of white people. It's a white affinity group. It's an all-white organization. And they understand that it's important for white people to show up in the streets against racist policies and racist actions and police terror and all of that. And they realize that it's important for them to challenge the systems that live within them, because these systems of white supremacy are so totalizing. We were born into them. And white supremacy has impacted all of our institutions and our collective consciousness and our culture, leaving nothing untouched. So what I love about Surge is they understand that it's important for them not only to challenge the systems of racism that live outside of them, but the ones that live inside. How are they developing an awareness practice? And here mindfulness can be very helpful. How am I in this moment perpetuating systemic racism? You know? And what do I do to uproot and eradicate this? And when I talked about this identity transformation, that's the kind of work that it takes. And it's very hard. It makes my heart hopeful to see organizations like Surge. And there's another, by the way, Surge grew by leaps and bounds. First of all, when President Trump was elected in 2016, and then after the public lynching of George Floyd, apparently 500,000 people white people around the country were interested in starting chapters in about 50 cities. And then you have an organization called White Awake, another white affinity group. I see some, yeah. Jerome is apparently knowledgeable about that or involved in it. But White Awake it does similar work. They do both the outer transformational work and the social transformational work and the internal transformational work. And what I particularly like about White Awake is they're looking at this identity transformation process, how white people can look to their indigenous roots, Celtic, Samitic, or whatever, to provide the soil, the nourishment, the resources that they can tap into to become different, to transform themselves. And then, of course, there's all kinds of the whole field of critical whiteness and all of the books, literature that's coming out of that. There's so many tools out there and so many resources that white people can take advantage of and in doing their work. I'm thinking about something. I was doing a anti-racist restorative justice indigeneity circle at a university in New England, and it was probably 60% white. And when we got to the module where we were talking about racism, my co-facilitator and I asked, how many white people in the room think they're racist? All of them raised their hands. And we were so happy. We were so happy at that. Because that meant that they had taken the important first step on the journey of becoming anti-racist. So they weren't, they weren't responding with white fragility. They weren't responding with feeling guilty about it, feeling bad about it. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel bad. It just is, and it's not your fault. You were born into this system of white supremacy. It's the air that you breathe. It's the ecology. It's all around you. So use your energy instead of feeling bad and guilty on yourself, on working on yourself, cultivating awareness practices that will bring about transformation that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
So that was Jerome, and then Jermaine. I had some difficulty with the sound. I didn't hear it. I didn't hear everything that he said. Can you?
Hmm. Yeah, it was in the spirit of he's a college student in the university system who is kind of positioned to bring more attention to issues of diversity, equity, and social justice. And he was asking for advice for in terms of how to communicate the importance of the work.
Yeah. Well, it's Jermaine, I find all over the country that it's students, and when you look at history, it's always been this way, who are driving these anti-racist developments and these transformations at universities around the country. And I have been in communication with so many institutions of higher learning that have dedicated themselves to becoming anti-racist institutions. That's another development that it's a wave that's sweeping across universities in this country. And one of the universities that has, to me, done a yeoman's job in addressing these issues is Amherst. So I would look at Amherst College's website. Now, it's no accident that they have had a very powerful student movement active, for decades, and especially active over the last couple of years. That movement, those students have been driving the transformations that are happening at the leadership levels there. The president made an incredible apology publicly, where she apologized for invisibilizing Black students, for hypervisibilizing Black students, for underrepresenting Black students, for Black students not seeing themselves in curricula. A beautiful apology, but more than the apology, saying sorry is important in restorative justice accountability. Doing sorry is most important as well. And they are doing things that there's a whole menu of activities that they are engaging in, other than the normal diversify the faculty, diversify the student body, change the curriculum. So I'd suggest that you look there on their website, and you'll see some letters from the Black alumni and Black students that essentially lay out for the president what needs to be done, and it's really amazing. Ethos, nonprofits and the nonprofit industrial complex, as they say. Is your nonprofit willing to become, I don't know if it's predominantly white or what the demographics are, but becoming an anti-racist institution again, is the leadership of that organization, the membership supportive of that? And you may need to organize the staff, organize the community. I don't know, what the balance of power is there, what the political, what the political leanings are there. But if you may need to bring more people to press the leadership to devote itself to becoming a anti-racist and perhaps a restorative or health promoting institution. I don't know if you've done circles, but I think circle processes, restorative justice circle processes that are grounded in anti-racist values and anti-heteropatriarchal values could be very, very helpful. And I want to just add here, because this is a conversation I've been wanting to have with you, Angel. Restorative justice accountability is based on recognizing harm, taking responsibility for harm, taking action to repair harm, and action to prevent recurrence. So recognizing, taking responsibility for, repairing, and action to prevent recurrence. So this kind of process applies whether we're talking about individual harm, whether we are processing individual harm in a circle, or whether we're looking at collective harm. And it's so important that when we do these circles, that there is consciousness around, collective harm, consciousness around collective trauma, around racial capitalism, and all of the historical traumas. I guess what I'm saying is that we need to create spaces, going back to those maroon spaces, that address interpersonal harm and address a social harm.
Mm-hmm.
And facilitators of these processes need to be grounded. So I guess ethos, if you have a facilitator, restorative justice facilitator, who's not grounded both in social justice and in healing, the restorative justice process probably won't work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other thing is preparation. In restorative justice circles, when you bring together a killer with the survivors, with the loved ones of that person who has been, you don't bring them together willy-nilly. And in fact, when you want to have cross-racial conversations, African-American, white, people of color, you don't bring them together willy-nilly. It's important in restorative justice processes, we prepare parties, we do separate circles with the persons responsible for harm, to make sure, and with the persons who have been harmed, before bringing them together. And the prime concern is that we don't want to bring responsible parties into a circle if those responsible parties are not recognizing the harm, taking responsibility for the harm, be willing to repair the harm, and to assure non-recurrence. If you have someone who's minimizing, oh, she was asking for it, oh, it wasn't that bad, or it wasn't me who did it, it was, so if someone is minimizing the harm or not taking responsibility for that, we don't bring them together only for more harm to occur.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's just an important kind of protocol whenever we do restorative justice circles or transformative justice circles. And Phoenix was talking about repeated harm. And the last comment that I made, Phoenix, I think may address some of that. Now, sometimes restorative justice is just not appropriate. If the person never takes responsibility, the person who's causing harm does not take responsibility for it, then we can't have a process, I, as a facilitator, can continue to circle up with the person causing harm, continue to be in relationship, and continue to develop trust if I choose. But we cannot bring that person who may be engaged in a long pattern and period of harm. It wouldn't be appropriate to bring them in to sit across from the person they've harmed without an assessment that they're not going to go in there and cause more harm. Yeah. And I guess I can give you an example of what restorative justice looks like in these circles, and recognizing harm, taking responsibility for harm, repairing harm, and assuring non-recurrence. This won't involve a cross-racial fact pattern. Just very briefly, a child in a middle school brings a BB gun to school. He brandishes it. Everyone is just petrified, thinking there's going to be another mass shooting. The students, the principal, the teachers, the cafeteria workers. Turns out it's a BB gun, right? So the school can expel this young man because he violated a rule, or suspend this young man. And of course, when you suspend a child from school, their chances of being incarcerated triple just with one suspension by the 9th grade. Their chances of engaging in violence in the future also increases. And their chances of dropping out of school double. And we don't want that child dropping out of school because 75% of the inmates in state prisons around the country are high school dropouts. So we want to keep that. So we use a restorative justice process. And that's what we've been doing in Oakland since 2005 or 2010, sorry. So we gather together everyone who's been impacted, representatives of the student body, some representatives of the teacher, the principal, the family of the young man. And we first have separate meetings, with the parties who have been impacted and the party who caused the harm. And we come into circle when we assess that we're ready. And the circle of, first of all, we use protocols to generate a sense of oneness, of deep, of radical respect, to create a relational field within that circle, so that everyone can sort of land where they are and be open and feel safe as they can. So we do those kinds of processes through ceremony. It could be as simple as breath work or movement. And then we do some relationship building exercises, sharing stories to kind of lighten up the space. And once we get to the place where it feels like, oh, all right, now we're ready to talk about this issue. We don't talk about the issue first thing. That's what we do in the Western world. We want to just, what is the problem here? Let's get right to it. No, let's do some relationship building and trust building work before we get to the issue. So we get to the issue, and the young man recognizes the harm and takes responsibility with an apology. The entire group talks about ways that he can repair the harm and prevent recurrence. So in this particular case, he did apologize, and from the heart. The entire circle, including the young man, came up with what action he could take to repair harm, the third element of restorative justice accountability. And because he was such a fabulous artist, they decided together that he would create an exhibit, a portable exhibit that he would take around to various classrooms and after-school spaces, and teachers' faculty rooms, and would do research to do a presentation on gun violence. And also, to go to those classes and apologize to all present there as well. And so that was the plan. And he actually, complied with, he carried out the plan, and that's how we repaired harm instead of responding with further harm. So where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. You're muted, Angel.
Yeah. No, I just want to thank you for resonating with those questions, and wanted to honor time and begin to close out. There was a colleague who Monica raised her hand. So just hold that thought, Monica. There were some questions that came up in the chat that I think could be answered with just one response for now. So Stefania, there's a website that you know the name of this. It's a repository of restorative justice practitioners. Do you know what's the name of that site again?
Restorativejustice.org.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So everybody, there was a couple of questions around. There's a couple of people who are here from the same school district that are implementing or trying to implement restorative justice in there. So restorative.justice.org. Check out their site. They have a repository of not just resources, yes, but they also have a repository of practitioners. Yes. That. So just wanted to honor that. And Monica, if it's okay for you to put your question in the chat as we close, because I really want to honor time and give us. I want to give you all an opportunity to just metabolize what just happened here in this delicate restorative digital circle. take a moment to, again, close out this practice and this experience with looking at the chat, looking at the screen and just looking at the faces of the people who have joined us. And I want to close out with a really big thought, which really is a thank you to Fania. But I want to just slow us down a little bit as we close out. I was fortunate enough to take a class with Dr. Cornel West at Union Theological Seminary during my first year as a doctoral student, and you see him as a public scholar, but that man is a machine in the classroom in terms of the amount of work he can hold. So we were in a class looking at the historical philosophy of W.E.B. Du Bois and looking at the contribution of just Black scholarship in terms of the nation's history. And he made this point that it hit me, and I just didn't get it until a few years later, and it's manifesting here. And I want to say this slowly, that Black people are a gift to the modern world. Just let that settle in, that even the process to create an abolitionist movement to dismantle slavery was a gift to broader efforts of emancipation. One, even the process of Black folks post-Civil War trying to create school systems in the South gave and provided the seed to create the universal compulsory public school system that exists today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you slow down even more and just sense into Sister Fania's long trajectory, long life of engagement, long life of healing and suffering as well, look at the grace. Sense into the grace with which she has held and the integrity. And a lot of that is her. And a lot of that is the tradition that is channeled through her, making my point clear that Blackness and Black people are a gift to the modern world. And so are many other people. So it's not to be exclusionary, but it's to, in its specificity, acknowledge Fania. And thank you, Fania, for joining us, and invite you to share any last thoughts as we depart.
What you just did was very beautiful. It sort of bookends, what you did in the beginning. And so I'm just so touched, Angel, and by all of you, because I can feel you're holding me. I can feel your arms around me, and that is healing for me. So I guess I would close out with, you talked about love in one of your talks with Thomas, and I wanted to just riff off of that a little bit. Dr. King said something like, love or power without love is abusive and can be violent. Love without power can be anemic and maudlin. Justice at its best is power correcting all that revolts against love. Justice at its best is power correcting that which revolts against love. Thank you for creating such a loving space for me. Yes. And thank you for allowing me to say that. When I was working with the Black Panther Party and working in the Black Power movement, love was the farthest thing from our lips. We were angry, more revolutionary than thou, more militant than thou, hard.
Mhm.
So thank you. And again, I want to say that spaces like these, whether virtual or real, where we embody love, where we embody interbeing and interidentity, and where we embody radical respect and radical relationality, and where we embody anti-racism and anti-sexism and all the systems of domination. These are maroon spaces. These are liberated spaces. These are spaces that call forth the future.
Mhm.
And my dream is to see spaces like this all over the country, all over the world, everywhere. You know that story about the 100th monkey? It turns out, apparently the story was mistold, but I think it's still, it's something that is food for thought. You know, the whole idea that there was a community of monkeys, 99 monkeys that were, one of those monkeys started washing the sweet potato in the ocean, apparently, you know, get a salty flavor. And before we knew it, another group of monkeys, or her group of monkeys, the whole group of monkeys started doing it, and then another group started doing, and then after the 100th monkey started doing it, this practice spread all over beyond the physical location of where all these monkeys were. So the idea is that if we have these spaces all over and they reach critical mass, that they will kind of, you know, create new patterns and new cultural norms. So thank you for being in these spaces, for creating this space, and thank you for holding this space, Angel.